The Rolls-Royce Pearl, 700 engines of the $90 million Bombardier Global 8000 screamed in agony before shuddering into a dead silence. On the tarmac of Teterboro Airport, Serafina Sterling stood freezing in her Yves Saint Laurent coat, watching her timeline for a hostile takeover evaporate along with the heat from the turbines. Her team of Ivy League engineers was baffled. They saw code errors. Jack Reynolds, a grease-stained nobody mopping the hangar floor, heard a cry for help. He knew exactly why the bird wouldn't fly, but when he stepped forward, Serafina didn't see a savior. She saw a liability. She was about to make the biggest mistake of her life. Jack Reynolds adjusted the strap of his faded coveralls, the name patch reading simply R, barely visible under layers of grime. The cold wind cutting across the tarmac at Teterboro Airport didn't bother him. The emptiness in his bank account did. He checked his watch, a cracked Casio. 2 hours until he had to pick up his 6-year-old daughter, Lily, from the specialized care center in Hackensack. "Reynolds, stop staring at the sky and clear that debris from Bay 4, barked Foreman Miller, a man whose expertise lay more in shouting than in aerodynamics. "On it, boss," Jack muttered, gripping his push broom tighter. He was invisible here. To the wealthy clientele stepping out of limousines and into the sky, he was just part of the machinery. Less important, actually. Machinery cost millions. Jack cost $20 an hour. The low rumble of an approaching aircraft vibrated through the soles of his boots. Jack didn't need to look up to know what it was. The pitch was distinct, aggressive, refined, heavy. A Bombardier Global 8000. But there was something wrong in the descent. A subtle dissonance in the port side thrust reverser. A hesitation. Jack stopped sweeping. He watched the sleek, obsidian black jet taxi towards the VIP hangar. It was a beast of engineering, custom painted, terrifyingly beautiful. The tail number, N1STR, identified it immediately. The Sterling Corp flagship, Serafina Sterling. Everyone knew the name. Tech mogul, ruthless venture capitalist, and the woman currently plastered on every financial news network. Rumor was she had 24 hours to reach Tokyo to sign the deal of the decade, or her empire would face a board-led coup. The jet came to a halt. The engines whined down, but instead of the clean whoosh of shutting down, the number one engine gave a sickening metallic clunk, followed by a hiss that sounded like a dying lung. Jack winced. "Compressor stall valve," he whispered to no one. "She's running hot." The air stairs lowered, and Serafina Sterling descended. She looked exactly like her pictures. Sharp, severe, beautiful in a terrifying way. She held a phone to her ear, her expression thunderous. Following her was a small entourage of assistants and 2 men in pristine white technician jumpsuits, her personal flight engineers. "I don't care what the sensor says," Serafina snapped into the phone, her voice carrying over the tarmac. "We take off in 40 minutes. Fix it." She hung up and turned to her lead engineer, a man named Preston, who looked like he'd never touched an engine without a latex glove. "Preston, why did we shudder on landing?" "Just a calibration error, Miss Sterling," Preston assured her, tapping a tablet. "The avionics are reporting a false positive on the fuel flow. We'll reset the system. Fast restart. You'll be in the air by the hour." Jack, standing 20 feet away by a stack of crates, shook his head involuntarily. It wasn't a sensor. It was a mechanical bind in the variable stator vanes. If they tried a fast restart without clearing the blockage, they wouldn't just fail to take off. They'd torch a $6 million engine. "Hey," Jack said. It was soft, drowned out by the wind. He stepped closer. He knew he shouldn't. He was ground crew, janitorial essentially. But the machine was hurting. Jack had a weakness for broken things. It was why he was still driving a 2004 Ford Taurus, and why he was raising Lily alone after her mother left when the diagnosis came in. "Excuse me," Jack said, louder this time. Foreman Miller intercepted him instantly, grabbing his shoulder. "Reynolds, get back to the mop. Don't even look at them." "Miller, listen," Jack hissed, keeping his voice low. That suit is about to hot start that turbine. The stator vanes are stuck. He's going to melt the core. Since when are you a Rolls-Royce certified mechanic? Miller sneered. You fix lawnmowers, Reynolds. Preston there has a PhD in aeronautics. Back to work. Jack clenched his jaw. He needed this job. Lily's medication wasn't covered by state insurance this month. He turned back to his broom. Behind him, the whine of the Auxiliary Power Unit, APU, kicked in. Preston was initiating the start sequence. Don't do it, Jack thought, his stomach tightening. The engine began to spool. A low growl rose in pitch. Then, exactly as Jack predicted, the sound changed. It wasn't the smooth escalation of power. It was a choked, gargling roar. Bang! A tongue of orange flame shot out the back of the engine exhaust, loud as a gunshot. Serafina screamed and ducked. Her security team rushed forward. The engine spooled down violently, smoke pouring from the cowling. "Cut it! Cut fuel!" Preston screamed, tapping frantically on his tablet. Silence fell over the tarmac, heavy and smelling of burnt kerosene. Serafina straightened up, brushing off a bodyguard. She walked slowly toward Preston. Her face was deadly calm. "You said it was a sensor." It must have been a catastrophic failure of the..." Preston stammered, pale as his jumpsuit. "You have destroyed my timeline," she said, her voice like ice. "Get another jet." "We can't," an assistant whispered, terrified. The board froze the assets pending the Tokyo signature. "This is the only aircraft cleared for international flight under your name right now. If we don't fly this plane, we don't make the meeting." Serafina closed her eyes. She took a breath that cost more than Jack's yearly salary. "Fix it, now!" "Miss Sterling," Preston said, his voice trembling. "That was a compressor surge. We need to inspect the core. We need a bore scope. We need parts. It'll take 2 days. I have 5 hours," she hissed. Jack couldn't help it. The waste, the arrogance, the sheer stupidity of it. He dropped his broom. It clattered loudly on the concrete. Every head turned. Jack walked past a stunned Miller. He walked straight up to the billionaire and her entourage. He smelled like industrial soap and old grease, a stark contrast to the Creed Aventus cologne wafting off the executives. "It's not the core," Jack said, his voice rough but steady. "And you don't need 2 days. You need a hammer, a 3/4 wrench, and someone who knows how to listen." Serafina looked him up and down. She saw the oil under his fingernails, the fraying collar of his uniform, the tired lines around his eyes. She saw a nobody. "Who is this?" she asked, not addressing Jack, but looking at Miller. "Nobody, Miss Sterling." Miller rushed forward, sweating. "He's the janitor. He's mentally unwell. I'm firing him right now. Reynolds, get the hell off my tarmac." Jack didn't move. He held Serafina's gaze. "Your expert just tried to force a blocked vein open with air pressure. That's why it backfired. The linkage is jammed. I can free it in 20 minutes. Or you can listen to the PhD and wait 2 days while your company burns to the ground." Serafina stared at him. The desperation in her chest was clawing at her throat. She looked at the smoking engine. She looked at Preston, who was uselessly scrolling through digital schematics. Then she looked back at the janitor. "You have 20 minutes, she said. "If you touch my plane and it doesn't start, I will sue you for every penny you will ever earn for the rest of your miserable life." Jack smirked. "Deal." Jack didn't wait for permission. He walked to the tool cart Preston had abandoned. He ignored the high-tech diagnostic tablets and reached for the manual tools. "He's going to strip the bolts!" Preston shrieked, finally finding his voice. "Miss Sterling, this is insanity. That is a Rolls-Royce Pearl 700. You cannot hit it with a hammer." "Quiet, Preston," Serafina said, crossing her arms. She watched the janitor. There was a shift in his demeanor as he approached the engine. His shoulders squared. The fatigue seemed to vanish. Jack climbed the maintenance ladder. He popped the cowling latches with a practiced fluidity that betrayed decades of muscle memory. He wasn't just a mechanic. He was a virtuoso who had lost his orchestra. He peered into the complex nest of titanium and hydraulics. The heat radiating from the failed start was intense, but Jack didn't flinch. He reached deep into the bypass duct, his hand navigating blindly around the hot metal. There, he felt it. The variable stator-vane actuator arm was caught on a slightly bent retaining clip, likely damage from a bird strike they hadn't logged or debris on a previous runway. The computer couldn't see a bent clip. It only saw the valve failing to open. "Give me the mallet," Jack called down. "Absolutely not," Preston yelled. Serafina picked up the rubber mallet from the cart and climbed the first 2 steps of the ladder. She held it out. "Catch." Jack caught it. Their eyes met for a split second. Up close, she saw that his eyes weren't crazy. They were focused, intensely intelligent, and the color of steel. "Don't make me regret this," she warned. "Stand back," Jack said. He positioned a long drift punch against the actuator housing. He took a breath. This required percussive maintenance, but precise percussive maintenance. Too hard, and he'd crack the casing. Too soft, and the clip wouldn't seat. He tapped the metal. Clink. He listened to the resonance. "Talk to me," he whispered to the engine. He adjusted his angle by a fraction of a degree. He swung the mallet. Thwack! The sound was dull, ugly. Preston groaned from the ground. "He's broken it." Jack ignored him. He reached back in. He wiggled the linkage. It moved freely. The tension was gone. The vanes snapped into the open position. "Clear the area!" Jack shouted, sliding down the ladder. He wiped his hands on a rag, leaving a fresh streak of grease on his cheek. He looked at Serafina. "Tell the pilot to cycle the bleed air valves manually, then start number 1. Keep the fuel flow low until N1 hits 20%. Serafina hesitated. This was the moment. "Do it," she radioed the cockpit. The whine began again. The starter engaged. The rotation picked up speed. Everyone held their breath. Jack stood with his arms crossed, head tilted, listening to the music of combustion. The engine growled. Then, with a smooth, rising roar, it caught. The exhaust temperature stabilized. The sound was clean, powerful, perfect. The obsidian was alive. Serafina let out a breath she felt she'd been holding for a week. She looked at Preston, who was staring at the engine with his mouth open. Then she looked at Jack. Jack was already packing up the tools. He looked sad. He closed the toolbox, wiped the mallet down, and handed it to a stunned Miller. "She's good for Tokyo," Jack said to Serafina. "But when you get back, replace that retaining clip. It's fatigued." He turned to walk away. He had saved the day, but he knew the drill. The rich stayed rich, and the help got fired for insubordination. Miller was already glaring at him, ready to hand him his walking papers the second the jet left. "Wait!" Serafina called out. The wind whipped her hair across her face. She walked over to him, her high heels clicking on the concrete. She stood toe-to-toe with the man in the dirty coveralls. "You're not a janitor," she stated. It wasn't a question. "I am today," Jack said. "Look, lady, I gotta go. My shift is over and I have to pick up my kid." "You just saved me $900 million, Serafina said. "And you want to leave to pick up a kid?" "My kid is worth more than your merger," Jack said sharply. Serafina blinked. No one spoke to her like that. Ever. "Miller," Serafina said without looking away from Jack. "Yes, Miss Sterling?" "You're fired." Miller choked. "Whoa. What?" "You hired an idiot," she pointed at Preston, "and you tried to fire a genius." She nodded at Jack. "Pack your things." She turned back to Jack. "Get in." Jack frowned. "What?" "Get in the plane. I need a flight engineer for the Tokyo run. Preston is obviously incompetent, and I'm not flying 12 hours over the Pacific without someone who can use a hammer properly." "I can't," Jack said immediately. "I have a daughter, Lily. She's sick. I can't leave her." Serafina checked her watch. "Where is she?" "Hackensack Medical." Serafina turned to her head of security. "Send the second car to Hackensack. Pick up the girl. Bring her here. Get the on-board medical suite prepped. We have a nurse on rotation for the flight anyway." Jack stepped back, his eyes narrowing. You are not putting my daughter on a jet. Would you rather leave her in Hackensack while you lose your job? Serafina challenged. I'm offering you a position, head of aviation maintenance for Sterling Corp. Starting salary is $200,000 a year, plus a signing bonus of getting you and your daughter the best medical care Tokyo has to offer. Dr. Kenji Ito is a specialist in pediatric immunology. I'm having dinner with him tomorrow. Jack froze. Dr. Ito. He had read the papers. The man was a legend. He was the only one who had successfully treated Lily's condition, but the waiting list was 5 years long, and the cost was astronomical. Why? Jack asked. You don't know me. I know you speak the language of my plane better than the people who built it, Serafina said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. And right now, I'm surrounded by people who tell me what I want to hear. I need someone who tells me the truth, even if it's ugly. She extended a hand. Her palm was manicured, soft. His was calloused, stained black with oil. Are we flying, Jack? Jack looked at the hand. He looked at the jet. He thought of Lily, sitting alone in the waiting room. He wiped his hand on his pants one last time and shook hers. We're flying. But as they boarded the Global 8000, neither of them noticed the man watching from the shadows of the terminal, a man with a long lens camera and a phone pressed to his ear. She's airborne, the spy whispered, and she picked up a stray. Some mechanic. Yeah, looks like he fixed the sabotage. On the other end of the line, a voice distorted by encryption replied, A mechanic? Interesting. If he fixed it, he knows what we did. He's a loose end. Kill the feed. And when they land in Tokyo, make sure they don't leave. The transition from the biting wind of Teterboro's tarmac to the hermetically sealed silence of the obsidian was jarring. Jack stood in the galley entrance, his dirty boots sinking into carpet that likely cost more per square yard than his entire apartment. He felt like a contagion in a sterile lab. Serafina had disappeared the moment they boarded, vanishing into a forward office suite to wage war on a satellite phone. That left Jack standing awkwardly by the entryway, watching the door as the second black SUV screeched to a halt outside. The security team moved with military precision, but Jack shoved past them the moment the car door opened. "Daddy?" The voice was thin, reedy. Lily sat in the back of the Escalade, wrapped in a blanket that had seen better days. Her face was pale, translucent under the harsh hangar floodlights, her eyes shadowed by the chronic fatigue of her autoimmune disorder. "I've got you a little bit," Jack said, his voice cracking. He scooped her up. She was terrifyingly light. 6 years old, but she weighed less than a sack of flour. He carried her up the air stairs, shielding her face from the wind. As he stepped onto the jet, the lead flight attendant, a woman named Chloe who looked as terrified of Serafina as the engineers were, stepped forward with a look of polite horror at Jack's grease-stained coveralls holding the child. "Sir, we have the medical suite prepped in the aft cabin," Chloe whispered. "But perhaps we should clean you up first." "Show me the room," Jack commanded, ignoring the comment about his hygiene. The medical suite was actually a converted guest stateroom. Serafina hadn't lied. It was equipped with hospital-grade oxygen, a vitals monitor, and a lie-flat divan that had been made up with Egyptian cotton linens. A nurse, hired on retainer for the executive team's health, was already calibrating an IV drip. Jack laid Lily down. She looked around, her eyes widening at the gold-plated fixtures and the soft, ambient lighting. "Are we in a spaceship?" she whispered. "Just a fancy airplane, honey," Jack said, smoothing her hair. "We're going to see a doctor who can fix you. A really good one." "Does it cost a lot of pennies?" Lily asked. She knew too much about money for a 6-year-old. She had seen Jack counting coins for milk too many times. "No," Jack lied, his heart twisting. "The lady who owns the plane. She's taking care of it." Once the nurse took over, checking Lily's vitals and settling her in, Jack stepped out into the corridor. The door clicked shut, muffling the beep of the heart monitor. He leaned his forehead against the mahogany paneling, taking a deep, shuddering breath. The adrenaline of the engine repair was fading, replaced by a crushing exhaustion. "She has your eyes." Jack stiffened and turned. Serafina was standing at the end of the hall. She had shed her heavy coat, revealing a sharp, tailored business suit that looked like armor. She held a tumbler of amber liquid, the ice clinking softly. "She's stable," Jack said, his guard instantly up. "Thank you for this." Serafina walked closer, her movement silent. She extended the glass to him. "Highland Park, 50-year, drink it. You look like you're about to vibrate apart." Jack hesitated, then took the glass. He didn't drink. He just held it, grounding himself with the cold crystal. "We haven't taken off yet. Why are we waiting?" "I was waiting for you to settle her," Serafina said, her voice devoid of its usual bite. She leaned against the bulkhead, studying him. "And I wanted to ask you something before we're at 40,000 feet. Ask. You diagnosed a compressor stall caused by a mechanical bind in the stator vanes just by listening to the spool down," Serafina said slowly. "Preston has a doctorate from MIT and he missed it. You're mopping floors in New Jersey. The math doesn't work, Jack." Jack looked down at the whiskey. The amber liquid swirled. "Math is easy. Life is hard." "That's a bumper sticker," Serafina countered, her eyes narrowing. "I don't hire bumper stickers. Who are you really?" Jack took a sip. The scotch burned pleasantly, tasting of smoke and honey. "I was the lead propulsion engineer for Ariane Supersonics. Before that, I did contract work for Pratt and Whitney on the geared turbofan project." Serafina's eyebrows rose slightly. Ariane was a legend. Cutting-edge, high-stakes engineering. "You were Ariane's golden boy. I remember reading about a lead engineer walking out 5 years ago. Just vanished. That was you?" "Lily got sick," Jack said simply. "The insurance didn't cover the experimental treatments. I needed cash, fast. I liquidated my 401k, sold the house, sold the stocks. Then the time demands. I couldn't work 80-hour weeks and be a single dad to a kid who needs 24-hour monitoring. Consulting dried up when I couldn't travel. Eventually I took the night shift at Teterboro because it let me be home during the day for her appointments." "You threw away a massive career," Serafina murmured. "I kept my daughter alive," Jack said, his voice hard as steel. "I didn't throw away anything that mattered." Serafina stared at him. For a woman who measured worth in net assets and quarterly growth, the concept was alien. Yet, looking at the grease smudge still on his jawline, she felt a strange pang of envy. She had billions, but she had no one who would mop a floor for her. "Take a shower," Serafina said, pushing off the wall. "There's a crew rest with a shower and fresh clothes, flight suits, in the forward galley. We take off in 10 minutes. And Jack?" He looked up. "Once we're in the air, I need you in the cockpit. I don't trust the avionics, and I certainly don't trust the pilot's ability to interpret them after what happened on the ground." "I thought you said the pilot was capable." "I said he was better than Preston," Serafina corrected. "That's a low bar. I want your ears on those engines until we touch down in Narita." She turned and walked back toward her office, the click of her heels absorbed by the carpet. Jack watched her go. He realized then that beneath the couture and the ice-cold demeanor, Serafina Sterling was terrified. She was a woman hanging off a cliff by her fingernails, betting her entire life on a meeting in Tokyo and an engine fixed with a hammer. The takeoff was violent, not because of the pilot's handling, but because Serafina had ordered a maximum performance climb. She wanted to be at cruising altitude and Mach speed immediately. The Global 8000 rocketed into the night sky over New Jersey, banking hard east over the Atlantic. Jack sat in the jump seat of the cockpit, wearing a fresh navy blue flight suit that fit surprisingly well. He wore a headset, one ear cup off so he could listen to the ambient hum of the aircraft. Captain Miller, no relation to the foreman, and First Officer Davis were tense. They knew who was sitting behind them. The miracle mechanic the boss had dragged off the tarmac. "And one stable at 98%, Captain Miller said, eyeing the instruments. "EGT is good. Oil pressure optimal." Jack didn't look at the screens. He looked at the throttle quadrant. He felt the floorboards. "Engine 1 is vibrating," Jack said over the intercom. The captain frowned, tapping a glass display. "Negative. Vibration indicators are green. 0.3 units. That's smooth as silk." "It's a harmonic tremor," Jack insisted, his eyes closed. "Low frequency. You can't feel it in the yoke yet, but it's there. The fuel flow is fluctuating by maybe 2 pounds per hour." "The computer corrects for that," the first officer scoffed. "It's auto-throttle logic." "It's not logic," Jack muttered. He unbuckled and stood up, leaning between the pilots to look at the engine indicating and crew alerting system, ICAS. He watched the numbers flicker. To the untrained eye, or even a trained pilot's eye, they were static. But Jack saw the rhythm. Every 12 seconds, the fuel flow to the left engine dipped, then surged. Micro surges. "Give me the maintenance log history for the last 3 months, Jack requested. "We can't access deep history mid-flight," the captain said. "That's server side." "This jet has a satellite uplink," Jack said, "and I know the password for the onboard maintenance server because it's the factory default. Everyone leaves it as default." Jack pulled a ruggedized laptop from his new kit bag. He plugged into the data port below the jump seat. His fingers flew across the keyboard. He wasn't just a grease monkey. Modern engines were flying computers, and Jack spoke code as fluently as he spoke torque specifications. He accessed the Central Maintenance Computer, CMC. He bypassed the user interface and went straight to the raw data logs. What he saw made his blood run cold. "Captain," Jack said, his voice deadly serious, "who did the pre-flight software patch?" "Standard OTA, over the air. Update from the service center in Dallas," the captain replied. "Why?" "Because," Jack turned the laptop screen toward them, "someone injected a subroutine into the FADEC, full authority digital engine control. Look at this code block." The pilot squinted at the lines of code. "It's a loop," Jack explained, pointing to a string of commands. "It tells the variable stator vanes to close by 5 degrees every time the altitude exceeds 30,000 feet, but it masks the position sensor so the cockpit reads them as open." The captain's face went grey. "If the vanes close at cruising altitude, compressor stall," Jack finished. "Flame out. At Mach 0.90, that creates a yaw moment that will snap the vertical stabilizer off before you can say Mayday. This wasn't an accident. And the bent clip on the ground, that was just the clumsy attempt. This is the real kill switch." Jack unplugged the laptop and stood up. "Keep her below Mach 0.8. If we go faster, the air pressure will trigger the sensor. I need to talk to Sterling." Jack exited the cockpit and strode down the long, silent cabin. The lights were dimmed for the night flight. He passed Lily's room. The nurse gave him a thumbs up. Lily was sleeping. He reached Serafina's office. The door was closed. He didn't knock. He pushed it open. Serafina was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear. "I don't care what the stock is doing, Arthur. If you call a vote of no confidence before I land, I will bury you." She stopped when she saw Jack. She held up a finger, signaling him to wait. Jack shook his head. He walked over, took the phone from her hand, and ended the call. "Excuse me," Serafina gasped, her eyes flashing with fury. "Do you have any idea, Arthur?" Jack said. "Is that Arthur Pendleton? Your VP of Operations?" Serafina froze. "Yes, my rival on the board. Why?" Jack threw the bent clip he had removed earlier onto a mahogany desk. It landed with a heavy clack. It was a small, curved piece of titanium. "Look at the fracture," Jack said. Serafina picked it up. She frowned. "It looks clean." "Too clean," Jack said. "Titanium tears when it shears under stress. It leaves a jagged edge. That clip was filed halfway through. It was designed to snap the moment you applied takeoff thrust. Serafina sank into a leather chair. The color drained from her face. Sabotage? Attempted murder, Jack corrected. But they knew there was a chance the ground crew might catch a mechanical failure, or that the fail-safe would just shut the engine down on the runway. Which it did. That was Plan A. There's a Plan B, Serafina whispered. I just found it in the engine computer, Jack said, leaning his hands on her desk, invading her personal space. There is a malicious code uploaded to your engine management system. It's designed to stall the engines and tear the tail off the plane once we're over the Pacific. Arthur isn't trying to stop you from getting to Tokyo, Serafina. He's trying to erase you. The silence in the cabin was deafening. The only sound was the hum of the very engines that were plotting to kill them. Serafina looked at the phone, then at the clip, and finally at Jack. The facade of the invincible billionaire cracked. For the first time, Jack saw the woman underneath, scared, isolated, and hunted. We have to turn back, she whispered. No, Jack said. If we turn back, you'll miss the meeting. You'll lose your company. Arthur wins. And frankly, I don't think we can land with this software active. The descent logic is compromised, too. So we crash? No, Jack said, a dangerous glint entering his eyes. He wasn't the janitor anymore. He was the engineer who solved impossible problems. We rewrite the code, in the air, while flying 600 miles per hour. Can you do that? I wrote the original kernel architecture for the FADEC systems when I was at Arian, Jack said. I can fix it. But I need route access to the avionics bay. And I need you to do something for me. Anything, Serafina said. I need you to keep Arthur on the phone, Jack said. Act like everything is fine. Act arrogant. Make him believe his code failed. I need him distracted so he doesn't trigger a remote wipe while I'm in the system. Can you lie to him? Serafina stood up. She smoothed her blazer. The fear vanished from her eyes, replaced by a cold, predatory focus. Jack, she said, her voice dropping an octave, I built a $10 billion company in a tank full of sharks. Lying isn't just a skill, it's an art form. She picked up the phone. Get to the avionics bay, she commanded. Save my jet and save your daughter. Jack nodded and turned to leave. And Jack? He paused at the door. If we pull this off, she said, you're getting a raise. Jack didn't smile. Let's survive first. He headed for the hatch in the floor of the galley that led to the electronics bay, the hell hole, as mechanics called it. He was descending into the belly of the beast to fight a ghost in the machine, knowing that one wrong keystroke would send Lily, Serafina, and himself plummeting into the dark waters of the Pacific. The avionics bay of a Bombardier Global 8000 is not designed for human comfort. It is a claustrophobic, pressurized compartment located beneath the galley floor, accessible only through a small hatch that feels more like the entrance to a submarine than a luxury jet. Jack dropped into the darkness, the soles of his flight suit boots hitting the metal grating with a hollow clang. The air down here was different. Sharp, smelling of ozone, heated circuitry, and the dry, recycled dust of high-altitude travel. It was the smell of pure electricity. He didn't have room to stand. He sat cross-legged on the freezing metal floor, surrounded by racks of black boxes, the brains of the aircraft. Thousands of blinking LEDs pulsed in the semi-darkness, a rhythmic heartbeat of data that kept them alive. "All right, you son of a bitch," Jack whispered, plugging his ruggedized laptop into the central maintenance port of the primary flight computer. "Let's see where you're hiding." Above him, 40,000 feet of air separated them from the black ocean. Inside the cabin, Serafina was playing the role of her life. Jack put on his headset, tapping into the cabin intercom so he could hear her. He needed to know how much time he had. "Arthur," Serafina's voice came through Jack's earpiece. It was remarkably steady, dripping with a bored arrogance that Jack found himself admiring. "I'm looking at the projections for Q3. If you think a minor dip in Asian markets is going to spook me, You've forgotten who built this portfolio." Jack's fingers flew across his keyboard. His screen was a waterfall of hexadecimal code. He bypassed the standard diagnostics, digging into the kernel of the operating system. He found it almost immediately. It wasn't just a subroutine, it was a parasite. The code was polymorphic. It was rewriting itself every few seconds to evade the jet's internal antivirus protocols. It had wrapped itself around the stabilizer trim control logic like a vine choking a tree. "Jesus," Jack hissed. "It's not just a stall command, it's a trim runaway." If triggered, the software would command the horizontal stabilizer to pitch full nose down. At Mach 0.85, the G-forces would snap the wings off instantly. The plane wouldn't just crash, it would disintegrate. "Serafina," Arthur's voice came through the feed, oily and distorted. "You sound stressed. Is the flight bumpy? I noticed some irregularities in the telemetry data we're receiving at HQ." "Smooth as glass, Arthur," Serafina lied. "Pouring myself a drink right now." "Why? Were you hoping for turbulence?" "I'm just watching out for my investment," Arthur replied. "You know, accidents happen, especially with these hurried schedules. Are you approaching the date line yet?" Jack froze. The date line. He quickly pulled up the navigation data. They were 300 miles from the international date line. "That's the trigger," Jack muttered to himself. The virus was GPS locked. The moment the aircraft crossed the date line, the logic bomb would detonate. The trim would pitch down. They would die. Jack typed frantically. He tried to isolate the code block. Access denied. He tried to quarantine the sector. System override. Administrator permission required. "He locked it," Jack said, sweat beading on his forehead despite the chill in the bay. "He has remote admin access. I can't delete it while the system is active." The realization hit him like a physical blow. The FADEC, Full Authority Digital Engine Control, and the Flight Control Computer were running the virus in active memory. You can't perform heart surgery on a patient while they are running a marathon. He keyed his mic. "Serafina." "Hold on, Arthur," Serafina said, covering the receiver. "What is it, Jack?" "I can't scrub it," Jack said, his voice tight. "It's burned into the active RAM. If we cross the date line in 40 minutes, the plane dives. I can't stop it with the computers on." "What are you saying?" "I have to kill the brain," Jack said. "We have to do a hard reset. I need to shut down the entire electrical bus. Everything. The avionics, the flight controls, and the engines." There was a silence on the line so profound, Jack could hear the static of the universe. "Jack," Serafina whispered, "if you shut down the electrics and the engines at 40,000 feet, we fall." "We glide," Jack corrected, though his hands were shaking. "We turn everything off. The RAM clears. The virus gets wiped from the active memory. Then I reboot from the clean backup partition. But we need to be dark for at least 2 minutes to ensure the capacitors drain." 2 minutes? "We'll lose about 6,000 feet of altitude. We have the room, but it's going to get very quiet and very cold. And if the engines don't restart, then we become the world's most expensive submarine." Serafina didn't answer immediately. Jack heard her take a breath. "Arthur," Serafina said, her voice returning to the line, stronger than before. "I'm going to have to let you go. I have some maintenance to attend to. We'll speak in Tokyo." "I doubt that," Arthur chuckled darkly. "Goodbye, Serafina." The line went dead. The hatch above Jack opened. Serafina's face appeared, framed by the soft lighting of the galley. She looked down into the gloom of the avionics bay. She looked terrified, but her jaw was set. "Get up here," she said. "If we're going to fall out of the sky, I want to look you in the eye when we do it." The cockpit was a scene of controlled chaos. Captain Miller was purple-faced, veins bulging in his neck. "Absolutely not!" Miller shouted, slamming his hand on the center console. "You are asking me to intentionally flame out both engines and go dark mid-Pacific? It's suicide. It violates every FAA regulation in the book. I won't do it." Jack stood behind the jump seat, his flight suit smeared with dust from the avionics bay. "Captain, the alternative is an uncommanded pitch-down in 30 minutes that you won't be able to recover from. The software is compromised." "I don't answer to janitors," Miller spat. "You answer to me," Serafina said. She stood in the cockpit doorway. She wasn't shouting. She didn't have to. She possessed a quiet, terrifying gravity. "Captain Miller, step out of the seat." "Miss Sterling, I cannot step out." Miller looked at the billionaire, then at the mechanic. He unbuckled his harness with trembling hands. "This is mutiny. I'm logging this. If we survive, I'll have both your licenses." "Get out," Serafina said. Miller squeezed past them, muttering curses, and vanished into the crew rest area. The first officer, a young man named Davis, looked like he was about to vomit. "Davis," Jack said gently, "can you fly a glider?" Davis swallowed hard. I used to fly Cessnas on the weekends." "Great." Jack strapped himself into the captain's seat. It felt wrong. He was an engineer, a mechanic. He knew how these machines worked better than anyone, but flying them? That was a different beast. But he knew the systems. He knew the startup sequence. "Here is the procedure," Jack said, his voice projecting a calm he didn't feel. "I'm going to pull the master breakers. The screens will go black. The lights will go out. The engines will spool down. We will have emergency battery power only. That means standby instruments and a little radio. No autopilot. No hydraulics assist until the ram air turbine deploys. It's going to be heavy." "How long?" Davis squeaked. 2 minutes, Jack said. "We need the capacitors in the flight control computer to fully discharge to wipe the virus." Jack turned to look over his shoulder. Serafina had strapped herself into the jump seat behind him. She reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder. Her grip was iron tight. "Do it," she whispered. Jack reached up to the overhead panel. He looked at the guarded switches for the generators. Then he looked at the fuel cutoff levers. "Disengaging auto throttle," Jack said. "Throttles to idle." The roar of the engines decreased to a hum. The plane slowed. "Generators off." Click, click. The cockpit screens flickered and died. The cabin lights extinguished instantly, plunging the plane into deep twilight, illuminated only by the moon outside the windshield. "Fuel cutoff." Jack pulled the levers. The hum died. The vibration in the floorboards ceased. Silence. It was a silence heavier than anything Jack had ever experienced. The wind rushing over the nose was the only sound, a hollow, ghostly whoosh. The plane felt suddenly heavy, sluggish, as the hydraulic pressure bled away. "Deploying rat," Jack said, pulling a lever. The ram air turbine dropped from the belly of the plane into the airstream, a small propeller spinning to provide just enough hydraulic pressure to move the control surfaces. The plane began to descend, 1,000 feet per minute. "It's so quiet," Serafina whispered. Jack checked his watch. 30 seconds gone. He looked at the standby altimeter. 39,000 feet. 38,500 feet. The darkness in the cockpit was total, save for the faint glow of the radium dials on the emergency instruments. "Jack," Serafina said softly, "if this doesn't work, I need you to know something." "Save it for the ground," Jack said, gripping the yoke, fighting the sluggish controls to keep the wings level. "No," she insisted. The mask was gone. In the dark, she wasn't the billionaire. She was just a woman falling through the sky. "I didn't go to Tokyo for money. I went because my father started this company. He died thinking I was too soft to run it. He left 51% of the voting rights to the board, to men like Arthur. This merger, it was the only way to get the shares back, to prove him wrong." Jack listened to the wind. He thought of his own father, a man who fixed tractors and drank too much. He thought of Lily, sleeping in the back, unaware that her father was guiding her through the abyss. "You don't have to prove anything to a ghost, Serafina," Jack said, his eyes scanning the dropping altitude. "You built this. You kept it alive. That's enough." "Is it?" she asked, her voice trembling. 1 minute gone, Jack announced. 36,000 feet. The plane groaned. The airframe was cooling rapidly without the engine bleed air. The temperature in the cockpit began to plummet. "It's getting cold," Davis said, his teeth chattering. "Focus, Davis," Jack snapped. "Watch your airspeed. Don't let us stall." "Jack," Serafina said again. She leaned forward, her face close to his ear. "Thank you for saving Lily. For trying to save me. We're not dead yet," Jack gritted his teeth. 1 minute, 45 seconds. He reached for the restart panel. His hand hovered over the switches. This was the moment of truth. If the computer rebooted and the virus was still there, they were dead. If the engines had cold-soaked and refused to relight, they were dead. 2 minutes, Jack said. He flipped the master battery switch. Click. The screens flickered. A logo appeared. Bombardier. Jack held his breath. He watched the boot sequence text scroll by. System check. Memory test. Loading OS. No anomalies detected. Clean boot, Jack shouted. We're clean. Davis, start sequence. Number 2, engine first. Davis fumbled with the ignition. Ignition on. The starter valve opened. The low whine began, faint at first, then building. It was the most beautiful sound Jack had ever heard. Come on, Jack urged the machine. Come on, sweetheart. Wake up. Whoosh! The engine caught. The exhaust gas temperature spiked, then stabilized. The generator kicked in. The lights in the cockpit blazed back to life, blinding them momentarily. Number 1 engine, Jack commanded. 30 seconds later, both engines were roaring at idle. We have power, Davis cheered, his voice cracking. We have full power. Jack pushed the throttles forward. The Global 8000 surged. The G-force pressing them back into their seats as the nose lifted, climbing back toward the stars. Jack slumped back, sweat soaking his flight suit. He let out a long, ragged exhale. He turned to look at Serafina. She was pale, her eyes wide, staring at him. You did it, she whispered. We did it, Jack corrected. He pointed to the navigation display. We just crossed the international date line. And look. He pointed to the flight controls. Trim is stable. No pitch down. The virus is gone. Serafina unbuckled and leaned forward, wrapping her arms around Jack's neck from behind the seat. It was impulsive, uncharacteristic, and fierce. She buried her face in the crook of his neck, shaking. Jack froze for a second, then reached up and patted her arm with his grease-stained hand. We're okay, he said softly. She pulled back, composing herself, but her eyes remained soft. Arthur thinks we're dead. Yeah, Jack said, looking at the dark ocean below. By now, his telemetry shows us going offline and dropping altitude. He thinks we crashed. Good. Serafina's voice hardened, the steel returning. Let him think that. Can we disable the transponder? Can we fly to Tokyo as a ghost? Jack looked at the systems. I can pull the breaker for the ADS-B out. We'll be invisible to commercial tracking. Military radar will still see us, but Arthur won't. Do it, Serafina commanded. I want to walk into that boardroom like a resurrection. She stood up, smoothing her suit, the Ice Queen returning. But Jack noticed she kept her hand on his shoulder for a moment longer than necessary. Jack, she said, go check on your daughter. I'll stay here with Davis. Jack nodded. He unstrapped and stood up. His legs felt like jelly. He walked back into the cabin. The nurse was asleep in the chair. Lily was stirring in the bed. Jack knelt beside her. Daddy? Lily rubbed her eyes. Why did the lights go out? Just a little magic trick, baby, Jack whispered, kissing her forehead. Just a magic trick. Are we there yet? Almost, Jack said. Almost. He stood up and looked out the window. Far ahead, on the horizon, a faint glow appeared. The lights of Japan. They had survived the fall. Now came the reckoning. The boardroom of Sterling Corp's Tokyo headquarters was a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the neon sprawl of Shinjuku. Inside, the atmosphere was funereal. Arthur Pendleton stood at the head of the obsidian conference table, his face a mask of practiced solemnity. The board members, a collection of the world's most powerful investors, looked grim. "It is with a heavy heart," Arthur said, smoothing his silk tie, "that I must confirm the loss of contact with Flight N1STR. The telemetry data indicates a catastrophic failure over the Pacific. We must assume the worst regarding Miss Sterling. However, the company must survive. I am prepared to assume the role of interim CEO to stabilize the stock before the market opens." He signaled to his aide to bring the documents. The hostile takeover was seconds away from becoming a coronation. "Sign here, Arthur," a board member sighed, sliding a digital pad across the table. It's what she would have wanted. Continuity. Arthur suppressed a smile. He uncapped his fountain pen. For the good of the company. Boom! The double doors at the end of the hall didn't open. They were thrown wide with a force that rattled the glass walls. Arthur's pen slipped, scratching across the screen. Every head turned. Serafina Sterling stood in the doorway. She looked like she had walked through hell and froze it over. Her hair was windblown, her makeup gone, her sharp business suit rumpled, but her eyes were blazing with a terrifying vitality. And she wasn't alone. Standing just behind her, looking like a grim reaper in a navy blue flight suit, was Jack Reynolds. He held a ruggedized laptop under one arm and a heavy titanium clip in the other. "Serafina," Arthur whispered, the blood draining from his face. "But the telemetry lied, Arthur," Serafina said, her voice cutting through the room like a jagged blade. She walked toward the table, her heels striking the floor like hammer blows. "Just like you. We thought you were dead." "We were just trying to protect the assets," Arthur stammered, backing away. "You tried to protect your investment by murdering me," Serafina stated calmly. She reached the head of the table. "Jack." Jack stepped forward. He didn't look at the board members. He looked straight at Arthur. He tossed the titanium clip onto the table. It spun and settled, the filed edge glinting under the lights. "That's the retaining clip from the engine start valve," Jack said, his voice rough and commanding. "Filed down to snap on takeoff. And this—" He slammed the laptop onto the table and spun it around. He hit a key. A projection lit up the wall, lines of code, red and ugly. "That is the source code for the FADEC override," Jack explained. "It commands a nose-down trim runaway at the international dateline. It was uploaded from a terminal in this building. Specifically, Terminal ID AP-Exec-01. The room went silent. All eyes turned to Arthur. "This is absurd!" Arthur shrieked, his composure shattering. "A mechanic? You're listening to a grease monkey?" "That grease monkey is the former lead propulsion engineer for Aryan Supersonics," Serafina announced, her hand resting on Jack's shoulder. "And he is the only reason this company still has a CEO. Security!" Two large men in dark suits stepped out of the shadows. They weren't there for Serafina. They moved straight for Arthur. "You're fired, Arthur," Serafina said softly as they grabbed him. "And once the Japanese authorities are done with you, my lawyers will take whatever is left." As Arthur was dragged out, screaming about stock options, Serafina turned to the stunned board. She placed her hands on the table. "Now," she said, a small, tired smile touching her lips, "I believe we have a merger to sign. Underscore, 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 underscore." 3 days later, the sterile silence of Dr. Kenji Ito's private clinic was broken by the sound of laughter. Jack sat in a chair, watching Lily. She was sitting up in bed, color returning to her cheeks for the first time in years. The IV drip was clear, the new medication already working. Dr. Ito had called her prognosis excellent. There was a knock on the doorframe. Serafina stood there. She had traded the power suit for a simple cashmere sweater and jeans. She looked softer, human. "How is she?" Serafina asked. "She asked for pizza." Jack smiled, tears pricking his eyes. "She hasn't had an appetite in 6 months." I'll have the chef make her the best pizza in Tokyo, Serafina promised. She walked into the room and handed Jack a thick envelope. What's this? Your contract, Serafina said. Director of Aviation Operations, and a trust fund for Lily's education. It's irrevocable. Jack looked at the envelope, then at Serafina. I was just doing my job. No, Jack. Serafina shook her head. She reached out and took his calloused hand in hers. You taught me that my job isn't just about machines or money. It's about the people you keep in the air. Jack stood up. The distance between them, once measured in tax brackets and social strata, had vanished at 40,000 feet. When do I start? Jack asked. Serafina smiled, and it was the first genuine smile he had seen on her face. The jet is fueled, she said. We fly at dawn. Don't be late. Jack squeezed her hand. I'm a mechanic, Serafina. I'm never late. Jack Reynolds went from an invisible man mopping floors to the savior of a billion-dollar empire, proving that true worth isn't found in a bank account, but in skill, integrity, and the courage to speak up when everyone else stays silent. Serafina Sterling learned the hardest lesson of all, that surrounding yourself with yes men might make you feel powerful, but it's the person brave enough to tell you the ugly truth who will save your life. In the end, the cold machinery of the jet brought them together, but it was their shared humanity that kept them flying. If you enjoyed this story of high-altitude suspense and redemption, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel soar. Subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story. Question for you. Jack risked his career to speak up about a danger no one else saw. Have you ever had to stand your ground against a boss or authority figure because you knew you were right? Let me know your story in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.